It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Welcome into the second annual crossover edition of the Train with the Best podcast and Take Command. That is Chris Gorres, the co-host of the Train with the Best podcast. That is Logan Paulsen, the co-host of the Take Command podcast.
That's right.
And I'm Craig Hoffman, the host of both podcasts. What's up, boys?
Not much, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I think you had the latest night of all of us last night.
Yeah, I mean, when you get here, it's like obligatory to stay up till some ungodly hour, then get up at an ungodly hour and just be like, we got to just ride it out. But you guys went to the Pacers game, though, right?
We went to the Pacers game, and then we went to dinner afterwards at the obligatory Harry and Izzy's for the shrimp cocktail because we have a first timer here, right?
Yeah, our guy Lance, it was shrimp cocktail 1, Lance 0.
Well, dude, if you don't know that there's horseradish in that, like that'll just straight.
Well, so here's what he did. He did the classic rookie mistake of we told him what it was. He had his first one with a little bit of sauce, and he felt cocky about it. So he gets the second one with a big bite, and then it doesn't work out as well for him.
Get everything cleared out. I bet
exactly.
That nasal cavity is nice and clean, and everything's feeling good.
Right. But you know what? It's funny. One of the things that he said yesterday is the way that he put it is like this is like NFL homecoming.
Yeah,
because like you said,
like that,
you link up with friends who you haven't seen in a while, and you see people that you know, and you thought that you were gonna have an early night, and then that early night ends up being 1:30.
Yeah, and it's just like like I bumped into Sean Laval last night, the guy that I played with. He's like he's like an agent now,
Laval's an agent now?
Yeah, he's like talking about all his guys. Yeah, it was just good to catch up and talk to some of my coaches, then my agents here, and just like, and then it's like, so it's only about probably 30 or 40 minutes with each guy, but the volume of people here is so high that you just bump into everybody.
The conversations flow one into another. You're at whatever spot you're at.
Yep.
You turn around, or someone sees you, they come up, and you're kind of at the end of one conversation, but you stand in the same spot for 3 hours and talk to 6 people.
Exactly,
That's exactly right.
That's kind of how it goes. All right, so the reason we do this is because the Combine is kind of this mix of performance training and football, and that is essentially what our two podcasts are: performance training and football. And I think this year in particular, there's two big topics, Washington Commanders adjacent and NFL Combine adjacent, that have that fitness crossover that are going to be interesting for us to talk about today. The first is this decision by Marvin Harrison Jr. to not only work out here, but not work out for a pro day. He's not doing any drill type of stuff. He is training to be a football player next year in the NFL, not training to interview to be a football player in the NFL. And then a little bit later, we're going to have some fun with a topic that I know JP Finley and Mitch Tischler did on Beltway Football Pod yesterday. But we have two guys that have actually worked on building gyms, and Chris owns a giant facility.
Right.
So with the Commanders investing $75 million in FedEx Field in the facility in Ashburn, and we know that they've got their eyes on ultimately building a new practice facility, what would a state-of-the-art, modern NFL gym look like for Chad Englehart and his crew to work in? So that's going to be what we talk about today. But let's start, Logan, with the football decision-making process. Marvin Harrison decides, I'm not doing any of these drills. I'm not only not doing them here, I'm not doing them in Columbus. I am training to become a football player next year. What do you make of that decision, short-term, long-term ramifications?
I mean, I think it's really smart. I think, and I think there is a precedent for it. I know people think it's unprecedented, but I look at Drake London last year and or 2 years ago, and the big question about him was like, what is he going to run from a 40 standpoint? He never ran it. Dallas Goedert a couple years before that, big questions about his speed, just don't run your 40. And so when I talk to agents, when I talk to my agent, when he's advising guys, it's like, if it's not going to help you, don't do it.
Right.
So with him, there's nothing about this process at this point, just based on the film and what he's done and his career, that needs to be justified at this point. Like, I think I've said this on the podcast before, he's been the cleanest evaluation of any player that I've ever done. He's big, he's fast, he's got good route running nuance, he makes contested catches. Does he drop the ball occasionally? Yeah, but so does everybody. And nothing he does here outside of the interview process is going to help him. So for me, it's like, the only thing that can happen here is that even if you run a 4.2, it's like, great. You're not moving up anywhere. You're not bypassing a quarterback.
Right.
So, but if you do run a 4.6, you're going to be maybe out of the top 10. So I would just say stand pat with what you got. And then with regards to not doing anything at your pro day, I think the same logic applies there. And I think, Chris, you can probably speak to this a little bit too, though. It's like one of the things that I came out of my combine prep when I was coming out, which was like a million years ago, is I felt like I was very underprepared for rookie mini camp, OTAs, and training camp, right? And it's because you're preparing in a very specific way for very specific events. So I do think it's kind of smart for him. And from an injury prevention standpoint, I think it's going to kind of allow him to establish a foundation that's going to be very productive for his NFL career.
Yeah, I think you hit all the points about like if you can't raise your stock, then why even do this? Like you're just betting to lose money at this point, right? Like so, it's a great decision for him. And we've touched on this on previous podcasts. The NFL Combine is an underwear competition.
Yeah,
right. Like it isn't football. So if your goal is to, as for him, he's probably thinking about getting the numbers that he needs to get to his second contract. Yeah. I mean, you know, for somebody like him who's been around the league, who has a father that can mentor him, and he knows how the game is played. He knows I got to produce, right? So his decision to just work on football is a good one for him.
I mean, I agree.
Yeah, no, I think for him specifically, it's the obvious decision. And I am very curious, though, that it's now kind of come out. Albert Breer was the one who wrote the story for MMQB and SI. Like, I think this is going to be something more people do from the training side of it. Because I feel like a lot of guys skip the combine, then they wind up running at the pro day. And it's kind of like this, okay, we'll do it. You know, kind of almost reluctance to do it. And they typically perform fine because they're the best athletes in the draft, the guys that are making these decisions versus the guys who are like, I need to do everything because I need every chance possible to impress people. But I think overall, like for the idea that he is not even playing the game is, I don't know how many guys are going to get to make that decision based off their draft stock. But I think there's like kind of a second layer question here, which is more guys should do it anyway. Like, if you're trying to get into the top 10 and you're maybe in the 20s right now, right, and you know that a 4.3 can change your slot money, and it's that significant of a financial impact, then maybe it's worth it. But if you're the difference between the second and third round, right, and your 40 or your bench or your shuttle or whatever it is based off your position, that's the most important thing. Your movement drills on the field. Wouldn't you rather just be a better football player as a rookie?
I think you would, but I also think like there is this like, especially in the second and third round, like you're moving up, and there is something to be said for being a second round pick as opposed to being a fifth round pick. Like the team has more time invested in you, and so if you can do something to push yourself into that category, I think you should. And so that's, I think we're kind of saying the same thing. I think if it will help you and you believe it can help you, you should do it. But I was talking to my agent last night, and he's like, I'm not going to have one of my guys run tomorrow, because I don't think he's going to run as fast as he needs to run. And then it just becomes a question about like who he is. And he's still here to do the interviews. He's going to jump. He's going to do everything else. But like, I think if it's not a data point that's going to help you, like basically what I'm saying is if you're an athlete, if you're an agent, use this process to help you. Don't use it as like something like to hinder you or something that they can use against you. I think about Kyle Hamilton. It's not
a requirement to do all this stuff.
Right.
Like, I think about Kyle Hamilton from a couple of years ago. What if he never runs a 40? Is he a top 5 pick? Maybe. Right. Yeah. And so he cost himself a lot of money by running the 40 here. Didn't go well. Ran at his pro day. Didn't go well there. There's no doubt about like his film and everything that he's a good football player. So if I was his agent, I'm like, we know the numbers you're hitting in practice. They're not what we need. Go jump. Go do what you got to do. That's fine. Because I think when you look at his jump measurements, Kyle Hamilton specifically, they were excellent.
Yeah.
And so you're like, this means he's explosive, twitched up. He just doesn't run fast in a straight line. So why are we messing with that?
Yeah. No, I think running fast in a straight line is a very unique thing. It's something that we train for. It's something that you train for months. And again, you're running in essentially track spikes and underwear. And that's not necessarily going to be something that you're going to do on the field.
I would hope it's not something you're going to do on the field.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. If you are running in track spikes and underwear, you become a streaker at the Super Bowl. You are no longer an NFL football player.
Right. I don't think that's how they're trying to get onto the field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and like in terms of training, I think people like need to understand it's a drastically different skill set you're learning. To me, it's like I do max velocity training with all my athletes, but I do it in the same way that I would do a back squat. Like you want like max absolute strength development, but you also want like the contractile velocity. It's just a tool, right? So you're never using it as a way that I'm like a metric I'm like quantifying every single week or whatever. But like the mechanics of the run changes, right? Good receivers run with their feet a little bit wider apart, like a little bit of base, like 2 to 3 inches between their feet, because it helps them change direction. And when you're running for your 40, your feet have to come in really nice and tight. And so like you never hit those same positions necessarily. So there is a specificity element to this drill that people forget about. And and again, we talk about this every single year, but it's like so far away from football. And it's a good metric, because you can go apples to apples. I can go, oh, you ran a 4.2, this guy ran a 4.2. Like, oh, we go back and watch the film. Is it on film? Great. It's a great thing for evaluators. But again, if you're not going to do well with it, it's a lot of time, to your point, Chris.
It's a lot of time.
3 months, 4 months of you just training for this. The training style is totally different. You become a track athlete as opposed to a football player.
Yes, that's exactly right. Like everything becomes about the math and the science of 20 steps. Like, how do we improve 20 steps? And everything that we do is geared towards those first 6 steps and those last 8 steps, right? So that's not what football is. So if we are going to dedicate 2 months of training to 20 steps, right? Like that's just a lot of time and energy that is not the same way that we use max velocity when we're training an actual football athlete, right?
Right. So let's dive into that side of it, right? What does that training look like? Let's say, what does your February look like if you are training for the NFL? What does your February will look like if you are training for the combine at the end of it?
You want to go? I mean, for me, like we're just establishing like a base, right? Guys are coming off the season. You got to kind of get them back moving around correctly, and then you want to kind of make sure all the stuff they're dealing with from the season is cleared up.
Yes.
And then you want to kind of start to establish, for me, a little bit of volume. And we're not talking crazy. I'm not talking going out here running 300-yard shuttles, but I want to make sure guys are ready for the training, the harder stuff, the higher intensity stuff, the higher loads, the higher speeds, those decelerations that we're going to get to hopefully at some point. And, guys, depending on how banged up they are, you might never get there. But this is the time of year that I kind of use to kind of say, this is where I want to kind of start flushing stuff out. We're slowly starting to ramp up. And for me, when just combine to football, the volumes are drastically different. Like you're prepping for a
very different
game or training camp, and like the running volumes are much, much higher in my experience with this.
Yeah. So the first thing that's very obvious is, when you're training in February for combine, your event is at the end of the month. When you're training in February for football, your event isn't for 6 months.
That's a great point.
Right. So like we are in different phases of training, very much. So the other thing at combine is, this is you're going to get measured here. So they want to see how big you are, what your body fat percentage is. Like last year, there was a whole big thing about is Bryce Young going to be 200 pounds, right? So you're doing things to put on muscle mass, which is probably not a thing in terms of like training for football. Yes, you want to get stronger, you want to maintain strength, you want to develop power and force production and all those things. But the goal is not hypertrophy. The goal is not to be, I got to be 210 pounds with 4% body fat. That again is an underwear competition,
stuff,
right? Like you're standing still when they measure that stuff, right?
And to be clear, like you will have athletes that need to gain weight in an off season, but how you do it is very different.
Very different.
Right. If you got to gain 10 pounds by training camp and it's February, that's not that hard.
Yeah.
You got to gain 10 pounds by the combine, and it's the end of your college football season in January. That's a rough
big
month.
deal. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
For sure.
You and your refrigerator are going to become very best friends.
right.
You and every bit of protein that's ever existed, every bit of everything that's ever existed. You're going to eat more than you've ever eaten if you're going to put on 10 pounds in a month. And by the way, it's got to be good weight because, like you said, like it's that body fat percentage. You're going to get out there. You're going to be in, your underwear or the tight shirts or no shirt and running a 40. Some scouts care about that stuff. Some scouts don't. But like, why, if for the scouts that care, if they're decision makers at a team, like that's a team that could be off your list.
But also, I think like at this event, it speaks to like if you come out and you look the part, right? You're kind of chiseled up, your body fat's good.
Yes.
I know
you're on the all get off the bus team.
Yeah, and I know you put time in the weight room. I know you're a hard worker. I know it informs the character in a way that people forget, right? And so that's really what you're doing. You're just basically checking a box. Hey, look at how disciplined I was from the end of the football season to now. Right. Look at this product that I've developed for you.
Right. As, like the guy that tore his ACL last year and ended up like benching
Verhees, the guard for Baltimore.
For Baltimore, yeah. Yeah, so it's like you said. It's like you said, the character. Right? Did this guy put in the time to do well on these drills, even though we all know that these drills don't necessarily translate, but do you put the time in and are you somebody that is willing to work hard?
Yeah.
I think that's a great point because like if anything, like if you come into this event and you don't do well, and I can tell you haven't prepped for it. Like there's guys, we're going to watch all the 40s, right?
Right.
And there's guys you can tell that have never been a 3-point stance before. And like you knew today was coming.
Yeah.
And so what kind of preparer are you? Are you a long-term thinker? So in some ways, like that's the other stuff about this that's super important, right? It's not the number necessarily, but it's just saying like, this is the biggest job interview of your life.
Right.
Did you prep for it?
It's the Nirvana.
Did you study?
Yes, Did you study for the test?
It's the Nirvana, what is it, brown M&M's thing? So the famous story is, and now I'm going to mess it up, and all the Nirvana fans are going to be mad. I'm going to get the details wrong. But basically, Nirvana in their rider had it like, I only want, I think it was green M&Ms. And so like, if the band showed up and there weren't just green M&Ms, they were like, what the hell, you didn't read our rider. But it wasn't about the green M&Ms. So it was that they made sure, because it was the end of the rider.
Oh, I see.
And so it's like, this was a way, because of all, and this is like late 80s, early 90s, like pyrotechnology and stuff. Like,
oh, I see.
You know, we got to make sure they read every bullet point, because otherwise our show's not going to be safe for us and for our fans.
That's
so
really
it's a way for them to check it off. And so like it kind of became this whole other thing over the years of like, oh, these diva rock stars, they only want whatever color M&Ms, but it was a safety check.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what you're saying is like, yes, obviously the raw speed of these guys matters in the way that what color the M&Ms were did not. But it also is a test of readiness and preparedness and thoroughness, and like in a way, I guess, to encompass all that into one word, it's a test of your professionalism.
Yeah, 1,000%. I think that's ultimately what this is. It's like, again, like, do I really care what your 3-cone is? Kind of, but I've seen it on film already.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes or no on
if you
film.
get in and out of a break, we'll see it on.
I'll see it on film, right? But like, you knew this was coming.
Yep.
What does this look like? Are you in shape? Are you ready for the events? Are you ready for the field work? It also kind of speaks to the team that's advising you. So it is an interesting data point. You know what I'm saying? And I think like that's why there are metrics, physical metrics that come out of it. But I think the professionalism is something that really needs to be driven home for sure.
So I want to touch on that because we're talking about kind of the difference between combine and then just regular football training, right?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about the 3-cone and the pro agility, we know exactly how many steps you're supposed to take in those drills. In football, you don't always know exactly how many steps that you're going to take. But you take a look at a 3-cone, that's really the only chance that they're going to get here that they're going to measure where they're accelerating and it's not on a straight line.
Yeah.
Right. So when I'm talking about somebody like Marvin Harrison, who's getting ready for football, so much of his acceleration is not going to happen on a straight line. Like if you look at the foot, at the anatomy of the foot when they're running and they're leaning and trying to turn out of a sail route or into a speed cut on a dig, that foot, what that looks like and the ankle mobility needed for that's not the same thing as running a 40.
Yeah.
Or even running the 3-cone where it looks similar, but you know it's coming. Right. So
I was going to say, like, the thing that I always get out of this is like when you're training for football, it's much harder to think of drill work. And for those of you guys training at home, because it has to be, it's not early in the training block, but later as you go, it has to be super reactive.
Yes.
Because there's a kinesthetic awareness and a learning and just how to coordinate your body.
Right.
Like when you got to do it, you know,
the movement problem solver that we talk about.
Yeah.
Right.
And so like,
that's what we talk about on our pod all the time.
And I think it's incredibly important.
As you know, you listen all the time.
I listen more than people would probably think. I just listened to the Achilles thing. I thought it was great. That was the last one you guys did. But I think that's the thing is like, it's hard. It becomes much harder to think of drills that scale safely for football related activities that aren't like either super specific or too general.
Right.
And that's where it gets a little bit, and that's where the football training, and again, you have, like you said, you have 6 months.
You have 6 months.
So you might start with, you know, we're touching cones, and then you get to like, we're reacting to colors or blaze pods or whatever. And we just kind of progress through that. But the things that scale are not just weight on a bar and velocity on the field. It's problem solving, like we were talking about.
Right. Yeah. So that's what you look at. You have 6 months. In 6 months, I know that it needs to look like this. So if in 6 months it looks like this, in 4 months it better look like this, or we're not going to have a shot at it looking like what it needs to look like in 6 months. Right. So you just go backwards. This is what it looks like in August. This is what it needs to look like in June for us to be able to get there. This is what it needs to look like in May for us to be able to get there. And then take that all the way back to February. For me to be able to get to where I want to be in August, what do I need to work on now? Mm-hmm. So for me, the things are, like you said, kind of resetting, reflushing out whatever's in the body to correct the exercises. But for speed, we're still measuring speed only because we don't want to lose it. Like we know that if you don't run at high speeds, you lose high speeds. So for February, when we're training a combine athlete, we're trying to push that. for February, when we're training a football athlete just getting ready for football, we are still measuring that only to see if you can still hit it. But we're only doing maybe 300 yards for the week, where it's like, hey, I just want to make sure that you're still hitting this, because if we don't do this, you're going to lose this, and then it's too hard to gain back later on in the off season.
And I think people sleep on like just top end velocity stuff. Like your body and the tissue are not they're never going to be under that kind of stress like ever. So it's a good way to just kind of, everyone says, oh, you need to do Nordic hamstring curls, and I think those are really important. Obviously, I'm not diminishing that, but I think the number one indicator of hamstring health is total high velocity volume. Right. So if we can kind of make sure we're touching on that in the off season, make sure that that's moving effectively and you feel comfortable there, like I feel much better about you going into the season. And then the other thing with football that's hard, I think too, is you are dealing with these high velocities, these high loads, but you also need to make sure you're dealing with a certain amount of volume. Yes. Right. And I think that's the thing. Like I was thinking about it for the Achilles stuff. Like we've gotten so good, and you mentioned this on the show, you've gotten so good at, getting guys bigger, stronger, faster. We've cut out all this kind of what I would call junk volume. But if you think about the calf specifically and the foot, right? It's a muscle that requires a lot of volume, to kind of see adaptation. And so like, how do you make sure you're getting that those physiological adaptations in the calf, in the foot, while not killing your athlete? And you're kind of threading the needle a little bit. But I think that's, again, when you're training for football, you need to make sure you're getting a certain number of cuts in a week, getting a certain number of ground contact, you know what I'm saying? And totally that can get a little bit messy, but I think that's the difference, is you're training for this really complicated, nuanced, impossibly dynamic thing, as opposed to something where you're running straight for a certain number of steps.
And at the end of the day, like I would say the two biggest things is the kind of where you are in terms of specificity related to the goal, because of the time to the goal.
100%.
And then that thing, like, are we running straight line and then straight line, and then L shape, and then jumping, and then jumping? Or are we doing this multifactorial decision-making, dynamic, constant reaction type of thing? And I also think in terms of like the injury side of it, the talk about like some of the NBA stuff and what you said with the Achilles made me think of this. JJ Redick on his podcast like a year and a half ago probably talked about the change in schedule that the NBA made over the course of his career. They eliminated a ton of back-to-backs. They eliminated the 4 and 5 nights as often as possible. But what happened is now they play kind of every other night and they never practice. And JJ said, I think that we're having more injuries now, even though they've changed the schedule to optimize it for player health, because instead of playing back to back and then being able to take a day off and then practice, because like you'd have back to back, but then you'd have 4 days off, and the coach would practice you hard at least one of those days. And it's not in the competition. So you get to accumulate some of that load that in a sport like basketball or football, you need on the foot, you need on the calves, you get the ground contact, you get all that stuff that you're not going to mimic in the weight room. Like we've talked about that. Like we're not going to jump our basketball players in season. They're basketball players. They jump all the time. And so the idea that you're accumulating the right amount of practice volume specific to the game, which you're only going to really get in practice, is I think another huge difference between the combine training and the football training, and why I think a guy like Harrison being able to train like this now should probably help him a lot as a rookie.
I would think 100%. It should help him tremendously. And I think it's, again, that training, like people think about this too, like it's been a really interesting thing to watch, like with concussions and the rugby union and in the NFL, people aren't tackling as much. And so they're not as good at it. And so the hits that you are taking are worse because you're not in the right position all the time. And it's like same thing with rugby union. Like they changed some technical tackling rules in terms of practice. Like you can only tackle 1 day a week. And then they saw the number of broken arms increase by like 50%. Right. So like all of this stuff you're doing is a skill. If I, Chael Sonnen, the MMA guy, was like, we're training to be a fighter. So if we're not fighting, like I'm not getting better at my craft. It's the same thing with football. I got to make sure I'm tackling. I got to make sure I'm blocking. It's our job as coaches to make sure that scales correctly. But to your point, like I'm pretty confident that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to go out and run 1,000 routes between now and the season. So his general preparedness for the NFL is going to be significantly higher than the dude who took this time and was like, I'm running a 40 for 3 months, and now I got to get myself back into football shape. Like those transitions, and you could probably speak to this too, Chris and Craig, obviously as well. It's those short transitions that get dicey, where the volume increases really dramatically. So like from off season to training camp on a short block, like that's where you see a lot of injuries. And so now
sure.
Harrison has the opportunity to say, I can slowly ramp myself up so that day one, I'm going to be in tremendous shape.
Right. Well, and the thing is, real quick, like just so people remember, because this happened to me every year I was on the beat, and you finally like, oh, we got through the draft. Whew, big deep breath. Oh hell, rookie minicamp is next week.
Right.
Yep.
And so like it is quick, that transition from I was preparing for the combine, I was preparing for the pro day, I was preparing for the draft, and any last second whatever I might have to do. Now I'm drafted. Now I got to go to minicamp.
Yeah, it's very different, right? Like running for 5 seconds, 4.2 seconds, whatever it is, and then being off for the next 10 minutes. It's very different, than being in a series, than being in multiple series, than being in a 2 minute, right? So yeah, like being in combine shape is very different from being in football shape. And then the other thing is there is no thinking at the combine, like what you said, like you have to be able to react, recognize, and then all those things. So, you know, for you to be able to understand an NFL offense and what your responsibilities are. If I'm a wide receiver, I have to know not just my route, but my route concept and what's the spacing of my route. What are the other routes that are happening? What is my split on the field? Where am I supposed to be and when am I supposed to be there in relation to the quarterback's drop? Those are things that you do not do in combine training. You're watching
by the way,
film
a lot
of
of times you don't do in college football either.
Well,
True.
I think the other crazy thing about this is like you see that sometimes in the field work. You see that at the Senior Bowl because guys, people think, oh, they've been running routes this whole. Like I go to my trainer's gym, and they run routes like once a week,
right,
once every other week because they don't want to mess up their recovery for the 40, recovery for the 5, 10, 5.
Right, that the drills are prioritized.
And so sometimes when you see guys on the field or at the Senior Bowl, even you see guys that are a little bit off.
Yeah.
Because they're getting back into football for the first time, right? So like, I remember a couple years ago, like Jelani Woods, the tight end from, where did he go? Syracuse? He went to Syracuse. No, he didn't. He went to Virginia. And he slipped a couple times making breaks. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense to me. Because how many breaks has he run since the season ended?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I think that speaks to your point. It's like it's all very mapped out, very controlled. So that's like one of the things about the field work here. I love the field work here because it's the only time you get to see that kind of critical thinking element. Yeah. But it's also, you got to put it in context of like what the guys are doing and how they're being prepped for today. Because in terms of value at the combine, we've talked about this a little bit already. It's like 40, vertical jump, 5, 10, 5. You know, like those are the things you're here. Like the field work, you might as well just go home kind of thing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And the field work here, like the drills are not very complex. It's the kind of things that we would think of in a strength and conditioning session, not really a football. It's like there, come back. All right, you're going to backpedal. And then when I wave you forward, you're going to come forward and I'm going to throw a football at your number.
But it's important. I think that's the thing, though. It's important to see how they move in that reactive setting. Yeah. But it makes a lot of sense to me why a lot of guys don't look good.
Right.
Yeah. You know, you're like, that guy looks a little stiff, or that guy's kind of having a hard time with his feet. You know what I'm saying? And like, totally. It really is I think a very, it makes a lot of sense when you think about their off season in relationship to this event specifically.
And to be clear, I'm saying what I just said to draw the comparison to what football is, not to minimize the work here, right? Like that stuff is really important for the exact reasons you said. It's as close as you're going to get, but it's still nowhere close to what they're going to see the second they take the field and practice starts at rookie minicamp. Nevertheless, the full OTAs, the full minicamp.
I got to see this. I got to see this a little bit last year at a pro day. Right, it's very different when you're doing it a pro day for your school and your school is running it like you would at an Ohio State or Alabama, right? Whereas if you're going to a pro day and the NFL scouts are running it, right? Yeah. Because now they're going to explain drills as quickly as they can with not a whole lot of direction to see if you can pick up on it. Because that's what NFL coaching is. Am I going to have to spend an entire week with you for you to understand the concept, or can I tell it to you once and you got it, right? So that's something else that you have to be able to not just train for, but to prepare for. Because if you get invited into a mini camp, if you're not the first round guy, if you're a late round guy or an undrafted guy, and you're the guy that always has to ask questions because you don't quite get it, you're not going to be around very long. That's just the truth. So for you to be able to start working on things like that, like it's not just can you run a 40, but how fast can you take instruction? Right. How well do you receive coaching?
Feels like there's just the Easter eggs in the combine everywhere. And we're testing your professionalism. We're testing your listening skills.
No, for 100%. Like I watched the scouts run the drills, explain the drills, and in my mind, I'm like, they are purposefully coaching it this way to see who picks up on this, trying to see who gets confused.
Because I think that's the thing about the combine. It's everyone thinks they have this great, kind of Rolodex of interaction with these players. Like this is the one interaction you're going to get, right? A lot of these coaches, right?
Yeah.
One interaction, maybe a couple interviews.
Right.
So I got to get, an interview is different than on the field. So I want to see how that looks, how you respond, like your body language, how you interacting with other people in your group. Like those are things that matter because you get, because it's such a small, it's such a small window to get those interactions with the players. So
no doubt. All right. Anything else to add on this portion of the show?
No, I think it leads, like some of the stuff that we talked about leads into what we're going to talk about next, which is the design of a facility.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
All right, let's do that then. All right, second annual Train with the Best Times Take Command podcast here with Logan Paulson and Chris Gorres. I am Craig Hoffman. I should have said this off the top, by the way. We all have both credentials in both worlds. Logan, not only 10-year NFL veteran, but a strength coach as well. I obviously cover football and am a performance coach, and Chris, performance coach who's worked with some of the NFL athletes currently and in the past, but also play wide receiver at Cornell. So vast knowledge and experience on either side of me, and I have some too. All right. This, Chris, I think is most up your alley as someone who is the owner of a very large fitness facility. Onyx Elite down in Richmond, Virginia. If you're ever in the area, you should definitely go check it out. It's like Logan, I don't think you've had a chance to go down there yet, but it is.
No, I haven't been down to the one in Richmond.
It is a fitness playground. I love going there. It's the best. But I want to talk about what it would be like to help design an NFL facility. Chris, you've toured a couple. You got friends in the league, strength coach wise, where you've toured a couple. You've seen some really nice ones. Logan, obviously, you played in a couple of different cities. Let's just start off with the idea of space, because that's the biggest limiting factor anywhere, but especially in Ashburn for the Commanders. Their space is extremely limited with what they have right now, which is part of the problem. What kind of space would you need if you were designing like a facility from scratch for a team like the Commanders, who is going to be willing to spend some money on it?
If I'm designing a facility from scratch,
and I'm just talking about the gym, to be clear.
I also think it also depends on like your philosophy as a coach. You know what I'm saying? Like what you're trying to get out of the space too. Because like I always thought, like when you first start training, like, oh, I want a lot of weights. I want this machine. I want this. But for me, it's like now I want an area where we can lift, but an area where we can like run. Yeah. And I want it to be in the same spot. Like I don't know if you've been to the bubble. Like I'd almost preferred if the racks were in the bubble and we lifted in there, and then we could just run over to, our resisted sprinting or resisted jumps, and it's just all right there in the space. Yeah. Because that to me, that seems like that's perfect. Because like sometimes I want to get a potentiation effect from a squat or whatever we're doing. And I think that extra space of movement is really, really important.
Yeah, so we admittedly took this idea from Beltway Football Podcast because they were talking about it yesterday, and JP was asking me about it. And I was like, that was actually one of the first things I said was like, we can talk about the, how many squat racks, how many this, how many that. But like the thing I want as a coach now for athletic training is space, because these are athletes, as we've talked about, that need to move. So I need space for them to move.
Yeah, I think for me, the number one things that I look at is from an injury prevention standpoint. Like I got to keep these guys healthy. So this is what my facility is designed for. My facility is not designed to train them to be the best athletes that they can be. They already are the best athletes in the world. My facility now is designed to keep these guys as healthy as possible. So we touched on this in the first part of the podcast. There is nothing like high speed running. Right? Like there is nothing that you can do from an exercise standpoint, whether it be RDLs or Nordics, that's going to engage the hamstrings or activate the hamstrings the way that you would in a high-speed run. So I have to have modalities for all of my guys to be able to high-speed run. I'm going to start with space for high-speed treadmills. Treadmills that are going to go up to 25, 30 miles per hour, up to an incline. Just something where I can get you on here and I can say, hey, you've got 4 seconds at 22 miles per hour.
Are you talking like for overspeed work?
Yeah, overspeed work, high speed work. What you can use it for whatever you want.
Yeah, so
but just something that's going to get up there, because most treadmills are not going to get up to 20 miles per hour.
Do you ever? So like there was a period of time where in my off season I would it was pretty exclusive actually, but I'd only train on a treadmill. And I noticed that when I got to the field, my foot strike's a little bit off because it's hitting in front of you
Yeah.
and kind of pulling you through.
Was you talking about on the curve treadmills?
No, just this was like old straight.
Oh wow.
Yes,
straight.
yes.
And so that was the thing about that where I kind of get away from that now. I'm like, I want you on grass running.
Yeah.
Because I think it encourages you to find your feet and body position in a more specific type of way.
Definitely a big difference between running on a treadmill and running on the turf,
Yeah.
which is why I also like the idea of having this stuff near or in the bubble where we can actually get into real runs.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about like if we're training in April or May,
Right.
okay, I'm not using these high speed runs to calibrate high speed. I'm just using these high speed runs to activate your hamstrings so that we can maintain that strength. So that when we do go and we run on our flying 10s or flying 20s, which I want space for.
Yeah.
Now, like, hey, this isn't the first time that you've done that. We've touched high speeds. It's just it's more of an injury prevention thing for me for the max speed stuff.
So it's almost like the grass is a squat rack and or something free weight, and the treadmill is the machine version.
Correct. Yeah. It's the machine version where if I tell a guy, hey, there's also nothing. I will say this: there's nothing on the field that I can do to go from 0 to instantly 22 miles per hour.
Yeah.
Right. So like you have to build up to that.
Yeah.
Right. So if I can get them on the treadmill where they're going from 0 to 22 miles per hour, hold that for 4 seconds, and then we're out of there, versus telling a guy that, hey, we've got a 100-yard sprint, right? Like that's a very different thing.
Do you see transfer there? I mean, this is maybe getting a little in the weeds, but like that's something that I always get, like, because I want the athlete to know how to accelerate and decelerate. And on the treadmill, like you said, they don't really get that same kind of process. They don't really get the body positions of movement the same way. Do you find that the transfer of the treadmill is high enough that you feel good about it, or?
I don't feel good about the transfer. And again, like I'm not using the treadmill to transfer anything. I'm only using the treadmill to activate hamstrings in a way that I can't in any other modality in the weight room. There is nothing I can do in the weight room to activate the hamstrings the way that I can in a high-speed sprint. So I need that just to be able to activate the hamstrings.
So how do you program that, I guess would be my other question.
Yeah, so, well.
Because I'm sure neurologically very taxing, very demanding.
Sure.
You can't throw that in just like willy-nilly. Like, where does that got to go?
Sure. So these guys have sprinted before, right? So it's not like we're building from scratch somebody that needs to learn how to sprint.
Type of thing.
Yeah, this is an early phase type of thing. And again, like we are talking about we are talking about literally 30 seconds of exercise for the entire week. But it's the 30 seconds of exercise that I can't get anywhere else. And that's why I need this high-speed treadmill, because we might do like 5 sets of 3 seconds twice a week. Right? Like that's it. That's all we're going to get in like March or April. And then as we get closer to the actual season, we're probably not going to use these treadmills as much, right? So to build up to that, we still have all of our other exercises. We still have our RDLs and our Nordics and our hamstring curls and all that other stuff. And we still have assisted runs as well, right? So if I've got the space like we have at the bubble, hooking them up to a 1080 or a Vertimax Raptor where they can get assisted work.
You got a 1080? Man, you broke off, huh? How much is a 1080? That's like $20,000.
Well, you told me that if we're building a dream facility, you told me I have $75 million.
This is not Chris Gorres, Zaguchi
Let's get a couple of those, man.
The Vertimax Raptor, that's your guy. He's got the hook up there.
Right.
We're now talking.
But yeah, I love the 1080. But every time I'm like,
for those who don't know what 1080 is.
So 1080 is an awesome sprint tool where like it's a motorized sprint unit that hooks up to an iPad. And you can see max velocity. You can kind of encourage like certain deceleration of the sprint. So it's really good for programming because you're like, I want a 50% deceleration for this training block. And I can program that in. And then as we progress, we can go into assisted runs. We can go into resist. It's a great tool. The problem is it's extremely expensive. And
it's very expensive. Yeah. It's very expensive and it's not very fungible. Like you're not going to use it for a whole lot of other things, right? Like a squat rack I can use for bench, squat, lunge. I can do a bunch of different things.
I like you said fungible because it's like I know Alabama. Sorry, we're getting off track here. I know Alabama has like 20 of them.
Yeah,
and they said they only use one because they use it for rehab. They don't use it. It's such a specific measuring
It's
tool.
such a specific
They
thing.
use the run rocket for field work.
Right. So if we're talking about Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. I don't have any budget concerns here. So if I could, and I want to build somebody up to 22 miles per hour, right? So conventionally the thinking is, all right, we're going to build up to 22 miles per hour. Let's say what's 60% of that, what's 80% of that? I want you to run at 18 miles per hour, this and that, right? Instead of doing that with something like a 1080, what I can say is, we're going to run at 22 miles per hour, but I'm going to give you the assistance so you can achieve that at 70% effort, 80% effort, 90% effort. So the speed is still there, but the effort level isn't quite the same as if you were just running that on your own. Right. So that's how we would build up to that.
Mm-hmm. And the benefit being that neurologically your body's like, oh, we're going 22 miles an hour.
Yeah, like
you know what it feels like.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so your brain is firing on that level. Your timing is there. Your strides are there. And like I said,
this is a really nerdy question, but I feel like overspeed training in the way you're describing is really sketchy for people who are field sport athletes because they don't run all the time. Yeah. So again, like, how do you? So I always find resisted sprints are like more bang for your buck because you're taking people who don't run, you're kind of decelerating them, but the neurological intensity is very, very high. Yeah. As a good way to kind of get them into some of the stuff you're describing. Yeah. Would you approach it the same way, or is it like we're going 22 miles an hour on the 1080 day one from the
No. Not day one. Not day one.
But you know what I'm saying? Though? Like, how do you get that? How do you find that progression with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of measurements that happen. Like we would still do all of our flying 10s, flying 20s, right? So if we know that you're flying, what
would you do them before?
Yeah, like as a post test or a pre-test, right? Like we know, all right, we'll run a 40, but we're only going to measure your last 10 to see where you're at, right? So if you're at a 1.02, then we know you're at 20 miles per hour, right? So we know what you're capable of, and then we build up to things like that, right? Like, okay, we're going to do these flying 10s, flying 20s. Now we're going to transition over to the treadmill where you can do this without. And again, like the magic of the treadmill for me is going from 0 straight to 22 miles per hour. Right. So that neural drive.
And just so people understand, like, these are very fancy high-end treadmills, like the ones, they're the ones where you see like the videos of so-and-so ran 22 miles an hour. Right. And the coach has their hand behind their back, or there's a strap. Like, it's a whole ordeal.
Right. It's a whole ordeal. And the reason why that's the other part of it is, I know if we have a certain amount of space, this has to take up a lot of that space. Right. So I'm going to put this in here first and then make everything else fit, because I'm still leaving room for all of the other stuff. Right. But like this to me is the moment where people get hurt. Right. Like to me, like we're dealing with hamstring issues over and over again. Like, so how do we bulletproof the hamstrings? We've got to make sure that the hamstrings are mobile. We've got to make sure that the hamstrings are strong, and we've got to make sure that the hamstrings are powerful. Right. So, to do all those things and cover all those bases. And then going back to what you were talking about when we were talking about the Achilles, to me, the zone 2 of Achilles is jump rope. Right. So you talk about zone 2 training when you're getting ready for your high rocks. And it's like the value of zone 2 training is, it's not super intense, but you're building that base. Like, I know so many kids that don't know how to jump rope. And that's
a great point, dude. I mean, like, it's just an easy way to accrue a ton of volume.
Correct. Without a ton of intensity.
It's not that hard. Right. Relatively speaking. We should do an overspeed episode where you can ask the rest of the questions that are just, I see your wheels turning. So we'll do that on the trim.
And here's the thing about overspeed is, like, when people think of assisted work, I don't think of it as overspeed. Like, if you can run 20 miles per hour,
you're just thinking about it as like top speed.
Top speed with less effort, because people think of overspeed as, if I can run 20 miles per hour, now with assistance, I can run 24 miles per hour. I don't want you to do that. Right. If I know that you can run 20 miles per hour, I'm only asking you to run your 20 miles per hour, but do it at less effort. So now you're doing it at 70% effort instead of 100% effort. So now I can focus on the ground strike and what are my arms doing? What's my posture like? And all those other things. Right. So,
all right, that's so really more on that.
But that's what I would say. So, like, I think this fits the thing we're talking about, though, right? Like, it's exactly right. You want somewhere where you can run, somewhere where you get resisted work, somewhere you get assisted work. And I think the important thing for fans to hear is the last thing we're talking about is the lifting, right? It's it is important. Like, don't get me wrong, it's super important. Like the thing I would kind of say is like, is there a way for us to get eccentric overload later in a training block? Like, do we have weight releasers? Do we have some type of machine to get that done? But the weights are the weights. You know what I'm saying? They're there.
The other thing too is like there is no way that they've gotten to this level without going through a strength and conditioning program and hitting the weight room hard at whatever school that they were at. But they may not have gotten this training to help them understand like how to take care of their hamstrings even in the off season, right? So this is something that I think is actually low hanging fruit, but it's something that is not necessarily valued or been taught or been valued in weight rooms, because you think of, we're going to squat, right?
Right.
So
that said, I probably want like 25, 30 squat racks.
Yeah, I don't know.
You're going to need squat racks.
It's
for
crazy.
Sure.
Like, you know, because at the park they have, I want to say it's like a double rack. So I think they have 6 or 8 and they make that work pretty good. And so you don't need like, I think when you go to college weight room and it's like,
there's 100 kids on the team.
But there's 90 guys in the NFL in the offseason.
There's more than that in the offseason in college, because you might have 100 guys and then you have a group of 30 or 40 guys that are red shirts or you know what I mean? So it's like 100.
But I would still want like 25, 30. Like, I would love for in the season, the defense to be able to lift together, the offense to be able to lift together. Like, I think that's ideal. Again, if we're talking about
like perfect
Josh
world.
Harris,
have you ever been on a team where offense and defense lift together?
No, like, every weight room I've been in, the biggest weight room that I've been exposed to was the one in San Francisco, and I liked it a lot. And so it basically fits this model that we're describing. It's like a big warehouse, like coaches' offices in there, strength coaches' offices in there. They have probably, I want to say, 20 racks, maybe 15. So like everybody can be in there. So they have dumbbells in a separate section. They have the machines in a separate section. They have these big kind of garage doors that open up directly to the field. So the run rockets are right there. And in California, it's never raining. You know what I'm saying? So like you can just pop out there, get your work done. And so that's one thing that I loved about that. It was just so convenient. Like, we're going to finish our strength work. We're going to go right to the field. There's not this big transition where we got to walk 4 miles, you know, and 4 miles is an exaggeration.
Yes.
I think that's the thing. And like, so the other thing I wanted to ask, like, in addition to the racks, would you get like a velocity based measuring system?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, what is it, like perch is like kind of the one everybody's talking about now, right? Where it's like digital as opposed to having hooked something up to the bar, right?
Yeah. Everything is digital now. Yeah. Just something that's going to get me some sort of measurement. I mean, I'm obviously going to have all of the VALD stuff, the force plates, the Nord boards.
And so for people at home, like the force plates, you're just using that for testing, right? You're not using that as part of the programming.
Yes and no. Okay. Yes and no. Like one of the things that I love about like the cat is I can put somebody, if I know what their max force is, max isometric force, right? In, let's say, an acceleration step or whatever. And I'm going to say, and now I can put them on an iPad and I can say, hey, this is your max force. I want you to maintain that force for 5 reps at 3 seconds per rep. And they're looking at it, boom, 3 seconds, pushing as hard as they can. Like, that's so valuable to me, right? So the more information that we can give to the athletes. You're talking about
like for isometric work, right?
Isometric work,
overcoming isometric work. Yeah, definitely having that feedback is huge.
That feedback is so huge. So to be able to do that and not just get the adaptation that we want, but to get the buy-in from the athletes.
Yeah.
Because so much of what you're doing in a strength and conditioning weight room or as a coach is to create that buy-in from that athlete. Like, do they believe what they're doing is helping them as an athlete? Because if not, they're going to go to their own guy. And they should. I would never discourage that, because like,
especially if your guy is Chris Gorres.
If you have your own guy, like it would be Paulson. We always ask, I talked about this a little bit on some of our other podcasts. Like, if you're going to be somebody that asks your players to drop their ego, you got to be willing to drop your ego as well. So for you to think that you are the best solution for every guy that walks in is crazy, because that guy might have a great relationship with his own trainer, or that trainer knows him and designs programs just for them. Welcome that. You have to welcome that, right? But hey, can you buy into some of the things that we're doing here, or can we mimic some of the stuff that you're doing with your trainer here, so that you're doing it around the team? We're creating that culture here where, you know, we're all ultimately working for the same goal. So that's what not just your personality, but your equipment has to say the same thing. The way that you design the weight room, in Ashburn now, the way that the weight room is set up is you have your weight room, and then the fields are this way and the bubble is that way. But like you said, like if you go to Vegas or Chicago or Buffalo, weight rooms that I've seen where the weight room is right there, and then you can walk out of the weight room and step right onto the turf to do your sprints or your resisted work, assisted work, whatever it is.
Or you talk
that
about
would be the
injury
perfect
prevention, like if your gym is the center of your kind of warm up, injury prevention space,
Mhm.
to be able to go in there and then easily get to practice.
Yep.
Yeah, I think
That's huge.
the same thing in San Fran. Like we would have the rollers out there. You just
Mhm.
they're all, and it's not like this crazy setup where they got to carry everything to the field. It's like everything's here's the weight room. Just grab something, go on the turf, roll out,
Yep.
go to practice. And I think that kind of setup, the stuff in the weight room, I think is obviously really important because it reflects the coach's philosophy and perspective.
Yep.
But ultimately, I always come back to like you're trying to make a program that's 80% effective for like 100 dudes.
Yeah.
So like
exactly.
straight weights probably okay, running treadmill good, resisted sprints good.
Yeah.
It's more about the proximity and the location and making it easy for the guys
Yep.
to get in there, get what they need to get done, and then move on. You know what I'm saying? Like I forget where I was, but those companies that put up like the shipping containers of weightlifting stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought even that would be tremendously advantageous if they just put something on the turf at
Ashburn?
Yeah, in Ashburn, right? They
Yeah.
just got a rack there set up. It's all weather, little cover. Like that would be awesome because it meets this criteria that we're describing, and it gives you that ability as a coach to be like, hey, we're on the field, we're in the weight room, and it's very transferable as
Yeah.
opposed to like we're here and this is a separate part of our identity. I think combining the field and the weight room stuff is incredibly critical.
So there you go. Proximity is very important. Space, very important. And the weights are the weights. 45 pounds is 45 pounds,
It
boys.
is 45 pounds.
45 pounds.
Now what you do with that 45 pounds, that
Well,
can change the way
45
it feels,
pounds to me is way different than it is to Logan. But
but we don't measure it against that.
That's
we
true.
measure it against gravity, Chris. All right. That is our show here from Indianapolis, the second annual Train with the Best Take Command crossover podcast. Take Command, of course, out multiple times per week with me and Logan. Train with the Best bi-weekly, once every other week with me and Chris. We have tons of content on both podcasts from Indy, so whichever feed you're listening in right now, plenty more to come here from the NFL Combine. For Logan and Chris, I'm Craig, and we'll see you next time on Take Command and the Train with the Best podcast. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do
He's
it.
Very, very smart.